I'm here today for 30 minutes to basically tell some stories. Most of the stories come out of my own trenches experience I've had so far in cybersecurity and information security overall. Just a bit of a background. I'm a member of the board of Isaca, Romania. I'm a treasurer over there. Basically because no one wanted the job, but I'm more like, okay, someone's got to do this too. I've made 5 events before actually joining Isaca at all, just because I very much enjoyed the organization. The people made it. Again, the Romanian president of Isaca is a very great and powerful woman, and I do recommend to connect with her. I'm also a strong supporter across Europe. Most of the activities I have right now are not in Romania, are in London and Italy and France and so on and so forth. So every time I have the opportunity to go to an event locally, I'm more than willing to do that. And of course, it's a family engagement. My wife is also a member of Isaca. She's actually an older member in Isaca than me. I'm more like the technical security operations guy. She's more like the risk management type of person, so you can imagine the fights we have in the evening at home. That's nice. People usually argue about dishes, we argue about risk management. It's just the way we are. So that's a bit of a background. These are the areas where I'm gonna tell you some stories about. First is Enevo Group. It's actually an engineering company where I started the cybersecurity practice. It was a very nice story. We were building this huge digital dispatch center in Romania. The client said nothing about cybersecurity, but we calculated that 2 gigawatts of renewable energy would pass through that data center, right? Through that dispatch center, and it had no protection. So we actually had to invest in cybersecurity from our own money, from Enevo's group money, just to make sure that nothing happens, because we were going to be the ones to blame. So we've also included SOC and NOC capabilities. We've made a fairly good business model that we exported into Saudi Arabia, where the need for such type of cybersecurity in the energy industry is quite large, and it's a big threat. Then I served CERT-RO for almost 2 years. I was part of the incident response and crisis communication team. That was a lot of fun as well. And now I co-founded Cyborn 1.5 years ago, developed the Security Operations Center in Romania, and things are going pretty well, and I'm gathering up more and more nice stories to speak about. So now I chose this subject, situational awareness, because it's usually something not that promoted, not that popular among risk managers and information security professionals, but in our day-to-day jobs, it's becoming more and more important. So basically, this is a military type of philosophy. It actually started from Sun Tzu, from The Art of War, but then Douglas started to adopt it in order to train pilots to be really aware of what's going on when engaging either in combat or in commercial flight operations. Then, of course, the Israeli army took it and made it a mandatory course for all its officers in communication and telecommunication. He was promoted by, maybe you know it, Amos Tversky. He also wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. It's another book I highly recommend. And of course, it started with going mainstream with the CSOCs in the United States. The courses are still so proprietary mostly. However, bottom line is that prevention is not enough, and you have to go and focus on detection and response as well. And in order to be very efficient on detection and response, you don't just need to rely on machines that raise alerts maybe or that signal a flag, but you also have to be very present on what's going on a day-to-day basis and try to investigate by yourself, especially on the tier 1 and tier 2 levels in terms of security. Go and investigate by yourself. If you have a suspicion and it's not confirmed, still allow it 5 minutes just to make sure. And this is something that sounds very easy and simple to do, but most of our defenders don't actually do it. They say, it's not an alert, not my job, I'm fine. Let's go ahead and move on. And 90% of the times, at least from what I've seen, this is where attackers get infiltrated. Some people that are not so proactive are more redundant. They see some things, but it's not their job necessarily, so they just move on. Now, where does it make a difference? And it makes a difference basically in assessments and responses, right? So what do you do when you assess things? You go in and first observe. Then you try to see if your observation match the environment you're observing. Decide upon how to act. And of course, implementing it in the end. It's called the OODA loop. You can see it online. It has a lot of methodologies and so on and so forth. It's way better from an assessor or responder perspective than plan, do, check, act. Plan, do, check, act is great for a manager that wants to implement a project. For a defender, not so much. So just to give you a sense of how important it is to have visibility in terms of observation, there is a report from an auditor in the United States on the Security Operations Center of NASA, right? You'd think that NASA, which is one of the most important organizations on Earth in terms of exploration and fundamental research and so on and so forth, they should be like really, really protected, right? But then if you go to that report, it starts with a very nice phrase. It says, after 10 years of being in operation, NASA SOC hasn't been able to map all the enterprise network of the organization. 10 years into operations. 10 years. Well, no wonder you have defacements of NASA's websites and you have hackers going in and so on and so forth, just because they weren't able to get together in a room, divide tasks very well, go into the field and discover what's going on, come back and report and so on and so forth. It's a public report. I encourage you to look for it online. It's a lot of fun to go through it and read it. So when assessing risks and when monitoring governance and technical systems, I'm guessing most of you are very, very accustomed with this. It's not just, ticking boxes, and it's not just saying, yes, 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 I'm compliant, but it's also about putting a follow-up question. Okay, how? Why? What's the proof? And so on and so forth. There are banks that actually started with the normal questionnaires sent out. Everyone was compliant across Europe, but then they had some problems and they started to doubt it. So now they do something called spot checking. Are you familiar with spot checking? Well, spot checking basically means they hired a team of 200 people to go and check on those guys that fill up the questionnaires just because they don't trust them. So guess what? Compliance levels dropped from 80% to 45%. So there's not only about, all right, I have this, okay, it sounds good, seems to be compliant, I'm going to move on with my life. That's the biggest mistake we can do, and it goes down to ignorance. So we don't have an easy job in this industry. This is actually a very, very complicated job because on a daily basis, for a risk manager or for an incident responder, the amount of information coming from the environment around us is way bigger than what a fighter jet pilot has to deal with on an everyday basis, or a commercial flight operator. We think about these heroes that are the pilots of commercial aviation, but basically nowadays 90% of the job is purely automated, and they're actually, most of them are over there just for the well-being, the mind well-being of the passengers. Otherwise, since 10 years ago, a commercial plane can fly all by himself. Land, take off, drive, land back. So Yes, in terms of information security professionals and in terms of cybersecurity defenders in general, the amount of information is very, very big. It changes rapidly, and you don't only need to be compliant, as I'm going to talk about later, you also need to be disciplined. It's actually more about discipline and asking the right questions than about being compliant. One of the situations that I really like to talk about, we had this huge client in Bucharest for security operations, and we started to integrate them. We had a proof of concept with just a few of their systems, and they decided to see if we can react. So they performed the penetration test during our monitoring just to see if we can spot them and cut the guys and so on and so forth. Now, the nice part is that, again, the alerting system didn't raise any alerts. It raised 2 alerts, was a brute force attack, usual brute force attack, nothing special about it. But the guy said, well, this is still fishy. So they went through the logs, right? They went through the raw logs. Of course, we had a CM that allowed us to hover through them easily. So we found out that they tried another 14 types of attacks in the same hour. So we caught them early on. We went back to the client with the user accounts, types of tests they did, and so on and so forth. However, if we just relied on the alerting part and on the alerting rules, we would be in the dark. So that was very nice. The client actually went to the pen test provider and said, could you give me proof for these 5 tests you said you're doing, but we don't really know if you've done it or not? Guess what? They didn't do them. So that was a very big win for us, and it states that it goes beyond just watching alerts and responding to them according to an SLA. In terms of fast-changing environments, there's another very interesting story over here. We had this company from UK, they're into real estate. We provide monitoring and threat intelligence. And one day we saw a spike on the dark web of social engineering tools. And they were talking more and more about real estate. So something was fishy over there. So we went back to the guys and said, well, it might be nothing, but let's just perform real quick a social engineering exercise just to also spike awareness of your employees on this. Of course, the click rate was about 55%. It was really disastrous. The second day we went in, gathered and everyone, did a training, like a 2-hour training really fast. Look what you did yesterday. That's not good, guys. Please be aware, especially in this period of time, because look, we have information that phishing is ramping up in the real estate industry over here. 5 days later, we had 25 incident reports on phishing scams on that company. It was just in time. It wasn't about the scheduled social engineering exercise that we have to do annually and so on and so forth. It was more about seeing that the threat is on the rise, acting upon it right that instant, no matter what happened later on, and it might or might not have saved that company from a real-life attack. We don't know in the end if someone clicked or not. We didn't saw anyone clicking or any malicious activity, and it's now 6 months since then. So for us, it was a success story, and it was a success story because the client was on our side. And that was very important for us. The client understood the risk and acted upon it immediately. 2 of their peers in the industry weren't so lucky, and they ended up with ransomware. Come on. All right. So in the end, I've been through a lot of potential clients that said, well, we have cybersecurity. Great. What do you have? Well, we have a firewall. Wow, that's wonderful. And who manages that firewall? Where we outsource management. And what do they do? Well, they basically do firmware updates. Oh, that's wonderful. You're so protected right now. There is still a lot of work to do with business, especially with business, on raising awareness of what cybersecurity means and how it should be implemented. It's a lot about technology, but it's also a lot of operations, especially if you take a company that doesn't have an information security or cybersecurity culture. You should start with the discovery point. All right, do these guys have their network well mapped? Do they know how the processes are really going on over there? Do they have inventories up to date? If you don't have an up-to-date inventory of data and software and hardware assets, then you're in the dark. You can tell me you have a nice information security policy, which basically in the end is useless just because you are not disciplined and you don't keep your things in order in the back. Once you perform discovery, you can go to management, and over here it's a lot about situational awareness as well, because this is the point where you assess risks, you give risk scores, you put in place controls, you see how you check for those controls, you make the budgets, you know, you plan the investments, trainings, and so on and so forth. We all know the system in the end. Then it goes back to protection, which is two-folded. It's either external facing, so then it's the normal protection from outside threats, or it's the interior where you have to constantly observe how the environment is changing. Right now, compared to 25 years ago, 30 years ago, our systems, our organizational systems are a lot more organic. They shift and change pretty quick. If you work in a metric-based organization, you already know that that implies a certain level of chaos. So simply stating some systems, putting some controls in place, and just trusting that those controls will work and will not go that well in the end. Of course, in terms of response over here, I do recommend everyone to select the proper personalities for this, right? So we have a lot of certified people in the room, but some are more curious, some are not so curious. Some like compliance, others like curiosity, and so on and so forth. In terms of responders, I'd always go for the rebels. So, and all right, this is a little bit like this. So, usually this is people, processes, and products. But I don't really like this in terms of information security and cybersecurity. For me, it's a lot about the people, the persons that are in charge of what's going on, about the intelligence, and when I mean intelligence, I don't mean CIA type of stuff or dark web type of stuff. That's important, but also what's going on a daily basis inside the company. It's extremely important and relevant. Another very nice example, we worked with this NGO that was taking care of national and foreign politics. They had a lot of phishing scams, of course. So they were aware of what's going on. Elections were coming up. I was just sitting at the beer with this guy and I said, look, let me just do a social engineering exercise for you too, just to see what's going on, because this is the time where you're most exposed to it, right? So there was an office with 80% girls over there, so we decided to invite them all to a party, to a spa. Now the click rate was 98%, and they talked for half a day in the office what they're gonna wear to the party. For half a day. No one realized it was a phishing scam. And just, you were from KPMG, right? We took permission from KPMG to make it KPMQ, and that was it. So you could have seen the mistake over there, and we intentionally left 4 or 5 other mistakes over there just to be able to go back to the training, because second day we went back to the training and we said, look for this, 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 and this, and this when you check your email. Of course, it was exactly the right time because they panicked, and of course they came back and reported a lot of spam, basically, but also a few emails that we traced back to malicious IPs. Orchestration. Now, orchestration goes a bit beyond automation, right? Orchestration means taking all automated and non-automated technical systems and really observing what's going on over there and trying to make them work as per your internal organization's needs. The nice part over here is that as much as you'd want to automate things, and as much as you'd like to make things smooth, you go through automation and you say, well, if the machines do it, they do it better than human beings. That's correct, but usually in large organizations, you have separate systems where you still need human beings. So we had this thing, we went to a company, they had the same system in several countries. Same hardware, same software, same type of processes of data and so on and so forth. However, they have an automated patching system with ticks to be compliant with it and so on and so forth. However, 20% of them were lagging behind. That's because in the end, there was still a human being that had to hit deploy somewhere in the platform. It wasn't intentional. Some forgot, some weren't aware. For some, the email was, just left away and so on and so forth. And the management panicked over there and we said, well, this is normal. This is a normal percentage of human error. It happens. But this is why you have to be very aware on a daily basis on detection. Because mistakes happen, no matter how performant your system is and no matter how automated your processes are inside the company. So, just to end up with a few takeaways, communication usually saves the day. It's been so many times in incident response and in forensics where simple communication, asking questions until you get to the right answer, helped a lot. Also communication inside teams and also communications with your industry peers around your organization is very important, and it can make a lot of sense. From my perspective, making friends outside your company could someday save you from internal incidents. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Don't hire compliant people, hire disciplined people that are willing to contest the status quo at some point. It's probably a bit weird, is the combination of discipline and creativity, which basically goes back to critical thinking. Critical thinking will be more important than experience and skills in the nearby future as the landscape changes incredibly fast. Problem solvers, again, this is a soft treat, but problem solvers will detect problems early on. And this happens pretty often. Just to give you an example, and it's actually an example from my wife, there was an IT team. They said, yes, we saw this risk, but we didn't have a risk assessment. We didn't know how to treat it, so we didn't act upon it. Ta-da! Well, that's great, but did you report it? Did you talk to anyone? Did you? No. So this is the difference between compliance and problem solvers. Simulations. I talked a lot about social engineering today, but it's not only about this, it's also about business continuity tests, disaster recovery tests, red-blue teaming for large organizations where it makes sense to do this. Simulations are the most important awareness driver. Trainings are nice, but after simulations usually, because otherwise people won't understand why they're there, and it's normal. I cannot go to an accountant and talk to him about information security like it's the Bible and expect that guy to actually believe me. It's not his job. His job is accountancy, and I'm just bothering him. So simulations really tend to open people's minds up and make them listen. So I do recommend to push as hard as you can in your daily operations for this. For us is a golden rule. Of course, simulations are tied with awareness, and I go back to the firewall because I heard this so many times in Romania. I have a firewall, I'm protected. Then you do a social engineering exercise and you find out that firewall is pretty useless in the end. So these were a few takeaways from me. If you have any questions or if you want to follow up on anything, I'm going to be around all day, and I'm on time. All right, so thank you very much for your attention.